All right, well, thank you for joining us after lunch, and we are panel one of the two parallel sessions. We're focused on the actual experiences while implementing impact evaluations. So on our panel this afternoon, we have three individuals who are all actually involved in leading impact evaluations, implementing impact evaluations. So hopefully they can give us some really good perspectives on some of the challenges they encounter along the way. As a brief, I will share with you what I understand are the three questions that were shared with them that in their presentations they will try to address. Those questions are, or topic points are, give us an overview of the impact evaluation that you're focusing on or working on. Please discuss the opportunities that this particular impact evaluation is offering, why it was done, and what it's helping to learn. And then particularly then challenges along the way in implementing this evaluations, any limitations in planning the evaluation, in carrying it out, operationalizing it, and what you might be doing to address that. So also following on the protocol from the session just before lunch, I think Uma had a great idea, and we all have the bios in our packets of the speakers, so I won't go in depth explaining who we're talking to, but also since the first point involves an overview of your own evaluation, if there's anything in addition to what's in the packet that you think we should know about you or your organization, please share it with us. And we'll just go in the order that we have on the paper. So we'll start with Sonali Khan, Vice President Breakthrough. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone, and I'll try and keep within the time limit. So I'll move fast, and hopefully, if there are questions, then we can talk about things that seemed a little opaque at this point. So Breakthrough is NGO, and we work largely on issues relating to violence against women. And our goal is to make violence against women unacceptable. And for this purpose, we really look at creating social change actors in the community. And by social change actors, we really mean individuals like evaluators in this room to individuals in the community, government, unlikely partners like corporates, media, and because we really believe that unless all of these different stakeholders are involved, it's very unlikely that an issue like violence against women, which is so embedded in structures, in behavior, in norms, can ever get addressed. I think we live in really emotional times because it's really palpable, the visibility of violence against women, and particularly in India, it's really, if you look at the EQ, it's really high when we respond to issues of violence against women, and everybody is really talking about attitude change, behavior change, how can we address these issues, especially after what happened in December. And today, if we talk about rape, it's there in the newspapers, and the violence that women face. So I think it's very important to understand this context and then talk about how do we evaluate change in addressing violence against women, because this is so, the scale of violence is so huge, it is so deeply rooted, and it has different forms. And then you ask yourself this question, and even I ask myself this question, is why the hell are we doing an RCT on something that really belies any this kind of design? But anyhow, we are opportunistic, and we really, and I'm taking this question head on because I have friends here and we all discuss this, why are we doing RCTs on issues like this? But the biggest challenge that organizations like us face is we don't get money for implementation, because the biggest question anybody asks us, where is the evidence, where's the proof, can you validate this data, your programs are so small, you can never scale it up, so all those good questions. So we decided that if everybody can get money by showing evidence, and if RCTs and impact evaluation is a good method, why don't we just try it out? At best, we can fail, but there's no harm in giving it a good shot. So since this is a candid session, and you've asked us some questions about challenges along the way, even to begin doing an RCT was really a shift in perspective, a shift in challenging what we believed in. And even a lot of women and women's group from the sector keep telling us that you'll really shift the way we have been arguing that these norms are not subject to some kind of rigor which you can apply on agriculture, on health and sanitation. Are you crazy? So I think it's really putting this out there and then saying that we as women's groups are really open to evaluation, we are open to rigor. And yes, if there is evidence, then we want the government, the policymakers really to walk their talk and put the money here. So I think this is something we really need to address. I think this is something that I just want to flag, that these are the kinds of issues that we work on. And if this group understands that violence in forms of domestic violence, early marriage, gender-biased sex selection, sexual harassment in the public place are not new problems. You know, they're age-old problems. I mean, you know, it's something that we as an organization have been working on for the last 13 years, but there are organizations and generations that have been trying to resolve these issues. We have centers in India and US, and we have presence in a number of states in India. One of our claim to fame, and in which we have really pushed the boundaries, is taking the conversation on violence against women in a very popular manner to the unconverted. We really don't want to speak in echo chambers, so we come here to spaces like this to make a point, to to take the conversation forward. But where we really want to be is out there in the public, where we want to talk to the non-converted, because that's the only way we can see change at monumental level happen. So our last most successful campaign was Bell Bajao, which has been running for 5 years and has reached millions of people and has been adopted in countries like China, the latest one being Uganda. We have just launched our campaign Nation Against Early Marriage this August. And yesterday we had a session of data sharing, on Monday, sorry, we had a session on data sharing of the baseline from the RCT that we have conducted, and some of that I'm going to share with you this afternoon. The campaign, I mean, this is the grant that 3IE has made to Catalyst Management System to run a randomized control trial design research with our implementation on the issue of early marriage in the 2 states of Bihar and Jharkhand. This project is 2 years old, and it really, I mean, I think we would have worked faster on this project, but honestly, the RCT slowed us down. We didn't have the capacity, internal capacity, to really launch and ramp an RCT. It requires internal capacity of staff, right from the frontline trainer to myself. I really didn't know what RCT meant, and my friend from JPAL is here, and she knows I spent 5 days training myself on power, sampling and power and all kinds of things, which I mean, it's really, the organization had to go through a learning process at every level. And I mean, I think it's been great because it's added rigors in the way we work in very unexpected manners. Even developing the theory of change was very complicated. We probably had one of the largest, okay, so, sorry, the mic, I'm far from the mic. So just to say that even developing the theory of change was a very complicated process, and 3IE and CMS said, hey, you have such a complicated TOC. We said, but the issue we are handling is extremely complicated, so we cannot have just one intervention agenda. It's not like, go and wash your hands under a tap with soap. You're talking about a multi-level intervention program. So it was really complicated. I don't have the map here, but if anyone's interested, we can surely share with you the mind map. When it was made, it completely baffled me that, are we crazy? We're trying to do all of this. But there is no other way of addressing complex issues. I think assigning attribution in itself is a problem, because we as groups believe that we are contributing, we're not attributing. So this is a little bit of a problem, but this is what RCT is about, that if you weren't there, what would have happened versus the program that you're running. But in principle, working on women's rights is about what can you contribute to move the mountain, really, honestly speaking. Width and depth, I mean, we work with media. I think I'm going to run out of time very fast. But and I haven't gone through half my presentation, but the only other thing I would want to reflect here is the scale component, because as women's groups, we really think it's time that we operate at scale. We want the scale that the government can offer. We want to be able to replicate and our pilots that we are running at a smaller scale. So I think the RCT, if the evidence is adequate, will really help us do that. So just to quickly move on, we really followed the processes of an RCT, as you can see. We did the formative research, which fed into the design of the methodology. It's we have really used both quali and quanti tools because that's the only way we would have felt comfortable doing this study. I mean, it was really difficult to do it in any other way, and I think this was really something that worked. And if you look at the issue of early marriage, it is so complicated. I mean, you have to look at both cause and impact of early marriage on the lives of young girls. So you are addressing very complex realities, and therefore, I mean, I'm just throwing this up here. And we can, it's something that is more issue-based. How do you address it? How do you develop indicators which you can move in 4 years, in which you're supposed to complete your evaluation tool? We did the baseline last year. The midline is end of next year. And then in another 2 years, we do the end line. We've tried to be as realistic about the indicators, but then they are still very difficult to move. And and I think this slide really demonstrates the issue that, I mean, our formative research really threw up, that to address early marriage, we really need to work on sexuality. Sexuality, which is what really creates this whole hoo-ha around a young girl who hits puberty, and then her honor, her safety, her security, not to forget all the other social implication, and then the economic implication of seeing a girl as a burden. So the whole gender piece that gets articulated around this issue. So how do you sort of talk about these issues, which are absolute no-nos and taboos in a community? And I'm short on two. So I won't spend time on this one, but this is our strategy by and large. We have a communication strategy which straddles mass media, all forms of traditional mass media and digital, which in this case is mobile, because the communities that we are talking about here do not have access to internet, but yes to mobile. And we are using community mobile in this case, video vans, and a number of other forms of community-based mobilizing tools. And the third tool that we are using is training and capacity building of key stakeholders, which include the panchayat, the local governance, teachers, and other NGOs and CBOs in this case. But we are also working with young people in this case. Just to give you a quick look on the design, now this is the only reason why finally we agreed to an RCT. We said, okay, I'm not sure we're going to be able to prove the impact of our intervention. Hopefully we will try our best. We'll put in all we've got. But also the strategy that we use. Is it scalable or not? So we have actually created an intervention design with packages of our intervention. So we can compare what is the cost, return on investment on only media and mobilization, mobilization and training, so that we can make really strong recommendations on what you can invest on different kinds of intervention, and even for ourselves ultimately, because a saturation model, if you run, is really expensive and difficult to do. So this is something that really pushed us towards looking at an RCT, that, if we can really understand. So we have about, so I'm just going to quickly put this out. Yeah, oops, sorry. So if you can see, I mean, I think the Venn diagram has become a little light, but this is how we have randomized at the district level. So right to the Gram Panchayat level, where will the media go, which are the districts and what kind of dosage they will get. So we hope that at the end of this period, we will really see what are the tools that are working or not working at this level. So this is a bit of the issues at the baseline. I mean, one can look at this. It's really a simplified form of the TOC. Just to give you sort of an idea how some of this intervention is going to work with different kinds of stakeholders to then push the indicators on this. But the great moment was then when we presented this data, because the baseline data is now available, but it still is under peer review, but we did share it last Monday. And it was really interesting to see that newspapers and media actually picked up that data and did really strong advocacy pieces, pushing the government to really front and center the issue of early marriage. Mint carried an amazing piece. And let me tell you, we've been doing evaluations of different kinds for a long time, and we've been trying to share data, but we've never got so much attention as this data got. and it has made it into different business newspapers, which is very interesting. We make it always to the other dailies, but to get business newspapers to put attention to it, show diagrams. I mean, it was really fascinating. It's the first time that's ever happened to us where our data was quoted as credible data to look at the issue of and the magnitude of the problem. So if that's any evidence of the starting of a journey, I mean, so that, you know, we began very cynically, but I think but also saying that we are an opportunistic organization, I feel that some of that is paying off, and just to have, you know, our data being quoted, using it as a pressure tactic on the government, because we all know that issues like early marriage is not something that gets the kind of funds, the kind of resources, the kind of commitment even at policy level. So we hope that this is going to be the starting of a long journey, but it's really, I really feel the impact right at the beginning is being felt at policy, and this data is really helping us quote. Now, I'm not sure if I have any time to show a video, because this is about 4 minutes, so should I just skip it?
Want to see it?
I could only, yeah. So just to give you a flavor from the field, the complexity of the problem and the reality that we're dealing with, this is an amazing story. So I hope it sort of makes the case.
मैं छोटी सी थी, करीब 12 या 13 साल की उम्र थी, तभी मेरी शादी हुई। मेरी मम्मी पापा का बहुत गरीबी हालत था, और उस समय लाके मेरी मम्मी पापा मेरे को शादी का जब बात चला तो मेरे को मालूम नहीं था कि शादी क्या चीज़ होती है।
उस टाइम बच्ची को मैं पढ़ा नहीं पाया पूरा, इसलिए कि हमारी बहुत मजबूरी और हालात ख़राब थी, पैसे की कमी थी, घर द्वार भी सही नहीं था, और एक ही मैं कमाने वाला था, मजदूरी करता था, कोई नौकरी और कोई पैसा नहीं था, जिसके कारण मैं अपनी बच्ची का शादी एक अच्छा खासा परिवार में किया।
शादी होने के बाद वो बहुत मतलब मार पीट, शराब पी के गाली गलौज करना और हर चीज़ का दिक्कत करने के लिए ससुराल वाला भी बहुत काम करवाने लगे। अब बहुत दिक्कत हो गया वहाँ, ऐसा हालत हो गया कि अब हम बच नहीं पाएंगे।
उसके ऊपर बहुत तरह का प्रताड़ना होने लगा, दहेज मांगना शुरू कर दिया, नहीं देने पर मारपीट, बहुत तरह का मुसीबत दिया, और मैं अपने बच्ची को अपने घर ले आया, अपना घर में ही उसका परवरिश करना शुरू कर दिया।
बाल विवाह हमारे देश में काफ़ी समय से है, तो ये काफ़ी पूरे समाज के लिए शर्म की बात है। इसके कई कारण हैं, जिसमें से मुख्यतः मैं मानता हूँ कि देहात क्षेत्रों में काफ़ी गरीबी है, अवेयरनेस की बहुत अधिक कमी है, और तीसरा लड़कियों को अक्सर जो है परिवार में भारतीय परिवेश में बोझ माना जाता है। इन तीनों मुख्य कारणों से जो बाल विवाह की जो कुरीति है, इसको हम लोग पूरी तरह से वाइप आउट अभी तक नहीं कर पाए। अतः इस कुरीति से हम लोगों को सबको एक साथ एकजुट होकर इससे लड़ाई करना होगा।
मैं नहीं चाहती हूँ कि जो मेरे साथ में हो, मेरी बेटी के साथ में हो। मेरी बेटी जितना दूर तक पढ़ सके मैं उसको पढ़ाऊँगी, अच्छा शिक्षा दूँगी, और मैं समाज वालों से निमंत्रण करती हूँ कि जो मेरे साथ में हो अपने बेटी के लोग के साथ में नहीं होने दे, उन लोग को पढ़ाएं लिखाएं, अपनी पैर में खड़ा होने दे, उसके बाद शादी ब्याह करें।
मेरा साढ़ू का एक लड़की है जिसको भी मतलब कम उम्र में ही शादी करने का व्यवस्था किया था लोग, उसको मैं रोक दिया। उसको मैं बोला कि इसको पढ़ाओ, जितना पढ़ सके उतना पढ़ाओ, और कुछ भी मत इसके पीछे खर्च करो, पढ़ाई में ही जो करो करो। मैं जो गलती किया और किसी को अपने आंखों के सामने होने नहीं दूंगा। मैं इस रास्ता को चुन लिया, और जहाँ भी मैं देखता हूँ आज भी किसी के यहाँ भी इस तरह का घटना होते उसको मैं रोक देता हूँ कि ऐसा मत करो, अगर करोगे तो देख लो मेरी बेटी के साथ आज क्या हुआ है, वही घटना कल तुम्हारे साथ होगा।
जो भी लोग इसको सुन रहे हैं उनसे ये अपील है, एज अ पुलिस ऑफिसर और एज अ सिटीजन ऑफ दिस कंट्री, अवेयर सिटीजन ऑफ दिस कंट्री, कि आप लोग बच्चियों को बोझ नहीं समझें, और हमारे पूरे समाज को आगे आना चाहिए, बच्चियों को और बच्चों को इस तरह के क्राइम में धकेलने से पहले। और जो भी इस पूरी मुहिम में पुलिस की तरफ से या हज़ारीबाग पुलिस की तरफ से आपकी पूरी टीम को मदद चाहिए होगी या सामाजिक परिवेश में किसी को भी मदद चाहिए होगी, हम लोग हर समय पूरा जोर से इसमें मुहिम में पार्टिसिपेट करने के लिए और सहयोग देने के लिए तत्पर हैं। और मैं बधाई देना चाहूँगा ब्रेक थ्रू संस्था को, जिसने इस सामाजिक परिवेश में काफ़ी सामाजिक कार्य कर रही है।
मैं महिला मंडल सबसे जुड़ चुकी हूँ और मेरी बेटी 14 साल की है अभी, और मैं चाहती हूँ उसको जितना वो पढ़ सके मैं उसको पढ़ाऊँगी। और अभी शादी विवाह का कोई बात नहीं है। मैं भी चाहती कि मेरी बेटी का 21 या 22 साल की उम्र में शादी, जो वो अपने पैर पे खड़ी हो सके, उसमें हर चीज़ का समझदारी हो, वो सब चीज़ संभालने लायक हो जाए, वो अपने पैर पे खड़ी हो, उसके बाद मैं अपनी बेटी की शादी करूँ। अभी मैं उसको पढ़ाऊँ।
So thank you so much, and that's the sum of the presentation. I'm happy to take questions.
I think we'll proceed with all the panelists first, and then we'll take questions all together at the end. So thank you very much, Sonali. And our second panelist is Devang Thaker, Unit Head from Surat and Navsari, Gujarat Pollution Control Board. And I did note that we have the least bit of background in our material. So yeah, if you could introduce a little bit more yourself.
Sure.
Thank you.
No, I don't have presentation. I'm going to.
Oh, you don't?
Yeah. Yes, it's a gravity of subject that has brought one hardcore regulator and NGO on a same dais. Thank you 3IE for giving us an opportunity. I am Devang Thaker, representing Gujarat Pollution Control Board. We are a regulator in state of Gujarat for prevention and control of the pollution. We are the most industrialized state, and so we have more problem of the pollution. And being a regulator and being an engineer, I was feeling like a cucumber in a basket of apple that was stocked in the morning. But it was a good learning curve for me, and I understood the subjects, vastness of this subject, and all basic principles of the subjects. Perhaps this will motivate me and my organization to work further in this direction. Today what I am going to tell you is not fundamental principles, philosophy of the subjects, but I am going to talk you about the one case study. When I was going with my mother to any religious discourse, then Swami or a priest, who was giving more illustration, were more liked by audience. So now what I understood from that is, if you give your case study instead like illustration, you can be liked by the audience. So I won't talk much on the depth of the subject, but I will give you a simple case study that my organization has carried out. It is basically about environment audit scheme carried out by the industry. Gujarat is the only state in the country which is implementing this environment audit scheme. And in this environment audit scheme, specified industry, we are having certain categories of the industry which is required to be carried out the environment audit by the respective auditors. This environment audit scheme is well-defined document. It is available on our website also, gpcb.gov.in. You can go through that. This scheme is implemented since 1998, and it is an offshoot of one of public interest litigation that was filed in Honorable High Court of Gujarat, in which Honorable High Court and my organization thought that there is a possibility that you, being a hardcore regulator industry, may not come out with openness to you. It would try to, downtown certain data or some details due to our role of sticks. So High Court thought that there should be some breach between the regulator and the industry. And as an outcome, this environment audit scheme came into force in 1998, in which industry has to carry out environmental audit of its industry through a stipulated recognized auditors by the board. This scheme was going nicely, and it was getting some changes with time, from time to time, based on experience. But we had one thought in our mind always, that when auditor is being paid by an industry, there is always chance of conflict of interest. And in this conflict of interest, the auditor may not give true picture to the board or credible report to the board, because if it will do so, there are chances that his business would be in some problem. Because if he will give a very nasty picture of an industry for which it has carried out an audit, it is possible that that industry may not give an audit to that consultant next year. So what to do? How to solve this problem? And we had a thought that if we can do some central pool kind of arrangement, in which board gives audit of certain industry to a certain auditor on random basis, then we can get an independent audit of a industry, because here there won't be any connection between industry and an auditor. But to implement this, we need to evaluate it, and 2 years back we had a dialogue with research organization JPAL. Then we made an MOU, and JPAL conducted this research project on behalf of us, in which sample of 433 industry was taken, in which more than 200 industry was given this treatment, and other set of industries were compared with the results. The results came, very nicely it told that this is a good intervention. Board should go for it, that we should assign audit of an industry on a random base through the central pool system. Another intervention was that if we can do the back checking of this audit done by some Schedule 1 auditors. Schedule 1 auditors are usually engineering colleges, IITs, and state-of-the-art and national rapid institutes. So if we can randomly do back checking of these auditors through Schedule 1 auditors, it can also pay. And ultimate goal of the whole exercise is to reduce the pollution by the industry. So we have completed this study. We have started its implementation also. Now we have integrated this whole audit scheme with our ICT. We are having a good system, what we call the extended green node XGN. It is our portal in which we have online data submission system by the industry. So we have integrated this environment audit scheme with our system, in which henceforth the auditors, now that we will assign from next year, they have started giving their data to us, giving their inspection reports, giving the results of the samples taken by them to us, and now their integrity has improved. What I am trying to say from this case study is that this is a, no doubt it is a very old subject, it is relatively new subjects for a regulator and the government agency. And there is no much exposure of such kind of detailed study in government institutes. So we need to make leapfrog in this direction. We need to, what I would like to request to all present here, that there is a dire need to capacity building of the government organization for such kind of exercises. The difficulty we face is that many times we don't have a data. There is a dearth of data. I mean, such exercises last for 2 years and you require huge amount of data. Many times researcher expects us this much data you must have, but many times it's happened that regulatory authority don't have that data. So in that case you need to compile those data, generate those data. You cannot rely on secondary data. And in service sector it is possible your output you can measure it in terms of numbers. Here we do have many intangible benefits. Now how to measure these intangible benefits into objective form? This is also a great challenge. You need to develop model for that. You need to validate that model. This is a very rigorous exercise in which we need to build a capacity of the government organization. We are now thinking to implement such exercise in few more policies of the board in near future. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity and giving me a chance to share my ideas with you. Thank you.
And one more panelist, Ronald Abraham, Country Director from Insight. IDinsight, sorry.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. So I cheated a little bit. I took the questions, and I'm going to do about a minute on the first 2 questions and then spend most of the time on challenges. And I also wanted to aggregate IDinsight's experience as a whole in conducting impact evaluations. So first, a little bit about the organization. We aim to help policymakers and managers make socially impactful decisions using rigorous evidence. Therefore, we tailor impact evaluations to the decision-making needs of policymakers, such as some of you in the room today. Started in 2011, we're a young organization, and we're currently working in 4 countries, and we're doing about over 10 policy-relevant impact evaluations. This is an overview of some of our projects. I'll just talk a little bit about the work we're doing in Bihar. We are working with ICDS, Integrated Child Development Services, in 2 interventions designed to increase nutritional outcomes of children and mothers and reduce leakages in the nutrition public service delivery. And this is funded by 3IE. And one of the interventions that we will be evaluating is using self-help groups to actually administer the service instead of the Anganwadi structure. And the Anganwadi structure will, of course, continue doing a lot of the other vital programs that it's in charge of. The second intervention is using a community-based and a top-down based monitoring approach that uses technology. And so basically facilitating supervisors with mobile phones, but also engaging the community using a call center. Okay. So that was my 1 or 2 minutes about the intervention and the evaluation. I now want to go into the challenges. To do that, I've laid out here sort of what we see as a very simplistic theory of change of going from policy question to policy decisions that are based on impact evaluation results. So you have a policy question. You can sometimes have non-impact evaluation responses to answer that. That's, for example, process evaluation, secondary research, expert advice, etc. So which we won't focus on today. And then you also have impact evaluations to address it. So once you have a question, the next step is to design the evaluation. After that is to solicit, get funding, and execute the evaluation. The fourth, which sort of goes with the third step, is the implementation of the particular policy on a test basis on the ground. And once all of this is done and you get results, you also want the policy decision to be made on the evidence. Now, this is sort of the ideal theory of change. There are many challenges in these boxes, and some of which IDinsight has been able to address fairly decently, and some of which we're still actually learning how to address, and I think that's really what I wanted to share with you today. So I'm going to start with the first two boxes on the question and the design. First part is that as of now, we feel the status quo impact evaluations are more researcher driven, whereas if it needs to be decision oriented, if it needs to actually lead to policy changes on the ground, it should be practitioner driven. The questions need to come from practitioners themselves, people who are who have specific questions that can the answers to which can help them make policies. And one big advantage of doing that is that it takes care of the administrative feasibility of the intervention and the political supportability of the intervention. Because we are not good at figuring that out. But like Mr. Devang, for example, will know what flies and what doesn't fly in Gujarat. If he comes to you and says, I need to evaluate something, you can bet your bottom dollar that he's already ensured that that it's administratively feasible and it's politically supportable. He's only coming to you to figure out if it's technically correct. And so that's one advantage of making it practitioner-driven. The other thing about ensuring it's practitioner-driven is that you need to pay attention to the question, and the methodology is only a means to an end. So we feel that usually there's sort of there's a preference for only quantitative methods, or there's a preference for only rigorous randomized controlled trials. Whereas depending on the question, impact evaluation studies can be taken forward with a lot of other methodologies, and that should be taken into consideration. The second major issue is implementation. A lot of status quo impact evaluations use optimal implementation. What that means is that you focus quite a bit on ensuring that it is the idea only that gets tested and not necessarily the implementation also of that idea. Now, you do that because it's more interesting to know that so-and-so thing worked or so-and-so thing did not work despite the fact that the intervention was fine. If I say, let's say, an incentive program did not work, and why did it not work? Oh, because there was a lot of corruption. Oh, so you're not saying anything interesting about the incentive program. You're just saying there's corruption. So, but for something to be policy relevant, the intervention needs to be tested within the implementation capacity of the organizations that will actually make the policy decisions. And I think that's something that IDinsight is trying to do a little bit. And it's not easy, to be honest, and those who are in impact evaluations know that it's not. Second thing is long timelines. Usually studies take minimum 3 years, usually 6, 7, 8 years. We've heard the duration of studies already so far. People who need to actually make a decision have already gone ahead and made that decision if you are going to take 3 years or longer. This is also difficult to address. Something that we do is looking at proximate outcomes or outputs. So in the theory of change, if you know the link between, for example, fortified milk, we heard today, and nutrition is already clear, then we really maybe just need to do an evaluation to increase access to fortified milk. That's not fully satisfactory for all of us, but if you need to bring some evidence to the table in 6 months, that might be useful. And we shouldn't wait for publishing. We shouldn't wait to publish a paper before we disseminate results, because publishing is a long process. It needs to happen, but it's a long process. I'm going to skip the last line. We all know that evaluations can be expensive, and I think there are quite a bit of efforts now that are being undertaken to make them more affordable. Okay, the next part is funding to execute evaluations. So this is more in 3IE's domain, but of course many other organizations such as 3IE. So some of the challenges that we face while we're doing this is we feel that the funding opportunities seem to be infrequent. So for example, essentially, basically, there'll be an annual call for proposals, and it'll be on specific themes. But usually, how, there may or may not be a call for education proposals in February, which is exactly when someone wanted to do some really relevant, policy relevant research. So that's the problem. So we think it might be good. And I know that a lot of organizations, including 3IE, is considering sort of having probably an open window throughout the year. Correct me if I'm wrong. I've heard this, so I could be wrong. Second is the long review process. I think if we have to wait 5 months to hear back on decisions, that increases the timeline. So that's something that we want to look at. Finally is the theoretical orientation. There's still a preference to fund research that addresses specific gaps in knowledge, which I think is excellent, but a lot of times, for example, let's say a particular intervention has worked somewhere, we want to an administrator, let's say it worked in Kenya, administrator wants to look at it in Maharashtra. But if it's the same intervention, it's answering the same theoretical questions, it's difficult to actually get funding for that. So I think that comes in the way. Sometimes questions are just not interesting from a theoretical point of view. They might be operational questions that don't necessarily have an academic import. So looking at that is important. I put in a box here basically saying that if implementing bodies are going to use research to make decisions, then they should start funding it, just like consulting organizations get funded by their clients. However, that's still limited. It's growing, but limited. And I think if we have better demonstration cases of using impact evaluations as an actual service that works and is useful for administrators, I think the funding is going to also start generating from the organizations itself. Next one is on implementation of policy. How am I doing for time? We've got 2. 2? Okay. I'm not too bad then. It's on implementation of these things. Something that we faced in Bihar and we faced in other contexts in Uganda and Zambia as well is the second thing, which is bureaucratic procedures, slow bureaucratic procedures delays. And something that's, I think, a little bit more acute in India, I'm not too sure about other countries, is frequent transfers of senior officers. So, for example, in Bihar, we were brought in by an administrator to test those 2 interventions. Since then, there have been 3 people taking his place, and he had a subordinate, and there have been 3 people taking his place as well. So, in fact, Joe met 2 of the administrators, and one of them has already been transferred. Bandana is no longer ICDS director. So we are constantly dealing with this. So the person who asks the question is not going to be the person who's going to get the answer. So we feel 2 things could help here. One is having a strong recommendation from the outgoing officer. It helps that I'm based out of Bihar. It helps that we have a strong presence and engagement with the policymakers always. And we have sort of developed a very good relationship. Perhaps in the future, we are looking at working with organizations such as societies, and maybe even with politicians. At least they have 5 years, so we should even consider that. Last box, policy decisions based on impact evaluation results. So the hard truth is that policies do not change using robust evidence alone. It changes, but it also requires influence. So from our point of view, given that we always try to take evaluations on which are already important for policymakers, this is hopefully not as much as a problem, but we still think that policy decisions can be political and arbitrary. Right now, for example, we're evaluating whether self-help groups should be undertaking the nutrition program. It seems that the Chief Minister of Bihar loves self-help groups, loves Jivika, and he's already asked them to roll them out across Bihar. He's not waiting for the impact evaluation on Jivika itself. This is a self-help group program there. He may not wait for an evaluation on the nutrition aspect as well. So sometimes this is just sort of a political decision. In these stages, it helps to develop advisor status with the leadership so you have more influence. Also, it helps to have very high quality products that are brought onto government files. As someone said before, I think Chris said before, if there's very strong evidence suggesting that something should not be done, it almost never gets ignored. I'm going to skip the second one. I'm going to end with the last one. Actually, I'll just tell you the second one. which is that sometimes policymakers are not impressed with your studies. My favorite story about this is Jairam Ramesh telling two Harvard PhD economists who did very good work on teasing out the effects of rural roads on welfare on the ground. He basically rolled his eyes and said, now I need Harvard economists to tell me that rural roads are good for the poor. Great, so what? And these guys were, actually they were telling us this story with glee because, they realized that this is great for their PhD, but, for Jairam Ramesh spent 5 minutes with them and was not impressed. So to address this, you need to go beyond the effect size. You need to tell a lot more. If you had told him they're good because they have access to schools and that is how lives are improving, or they're good because of, if you have a story to tell that brings together your numbers, and I think that's a point that's been well established by many speakers today, that's going to be very important. That's going to be very useful. With that, thank you very much. Oh, there's a summary slide, which I think is there to read.
Thank you very much. So just to bring you all onto the same page, at 3:30 is the coffee break, which means we have 11 minutes for questions. So I will take a first round and pass them to our panelists. Please introduce yourself as you ask your question. And let's see who we have. Anyone? Oh, got 1, 2, okay. Yeah, go ahead since you have the mic, yeah. Oh.
Anyway, I'll make it quick. It's a question to Sonali. I was wondering, how do you measure results in that area, which is so difficult? And was that the reason why you chose early marriage, because it's easier to measure, the age of marriage, and for example, the incidence of domestic violence?
Okay, and we have Joe. Yeah.
Thank you to all three presenters. Chair, my question was to Ron, and I wanted to then understand, I really like your presentation. Why did you decide to do an impact evaluation? And perhaps you could talk a little bit about it, because I understood your reasons did not do it, given all of the challenges that you faced. But perhaps a little bit about why you decided to do it. And in response to the question that you raised, yes, there is a rolling window that 3I has, which is called the policy window, but it's currently closed, which does respond to policymakers asking for impact evaluations. So the demand had to come from policymakers in government or in other topics. Thank you.
And other questions? Okay, I have one over here. 2 over here. On the other side.
Hi. Yeah, it's working.
I know it's working now.
It's working. Hi, I'm Navsari from Global University. My question can be answered by Ronald or Sonali. The question is that randomized trials are usually small and they have a quick turnaround, and probably Joe also. How should we encourage them so much? Are we in a position to say that they can be scaled up, they can be implemented, and we don't really have those kind of questions being answered for many of these randomized trials that we see. What's the way forward to sort of using these small trials to a greater policy implementation?
And one more.
Yeah, Manisha, I just wanted to ask Mr. Devang that once you've taken a decision to have independent auditors to do the environment pollution impact assessment, and you are getting reports which are more objective, Is there a change in the policy of the regulatory body? Have you cancelled certain licenses? What are the systems you are taking in place to reduce that kind of thing, pollution now? And my question to Ronald is extremely valuable learnings from your, and I think you've articulated rightly the limitations of RCT and given inputs on what should be the practical issues in this kind of evaluation. But I wanted to know more about your Bihar experiment and evaluation. What is it? I understood from your introduction that in ICDS you are looking at two alternative models of delivery. One with the regular, better effective supervision with use of technology. And the second is the delivery through a SHG instead of an Anganwadi worker. Is that what you're looking? And is there anything else that you're doing in Bihar, and how far has it progressed?
All right, thank you. I think we better turn to our panelists to start answering those, or we'll run out of time. Perhaps we'll go down the line and with the question first to Devang. Yeah. And you might have to switch.
Yes. In principle, we have agreed to adopt this intervention that have come out from the research. The time cycle of the audit is from January, but for that we have already completed our base work, because once the reports and analysis reports and other data from the consultants now should come directly to us. So now we have integrated all those aspects with our ICT portal. Okay, so from January it will be coming. Certain legal aspects are also that we need to take certain opinions from the Advocate Generals, or even maybe needed from the Honorable High Court of Gujarat for the making modifications. That we are exploring it, and perhaps we would be clearing it. But I am very much optimistic that from next January, all the intervention that has come out from the research of the study would get implemented, and perhaps that is a very positive note for us.
Great, thank you. And yeah, I'm going to turn to Sonali. I think there were at least two questions, one on measuring early marriage and how you chose that as the intervention to be evaluating, as well as a question on RCTs in the turnaround.
Measuring data, okay. So thank you for these questions. I think we really started our work on early marriage because of our work on domestic violence. When we were working on the issue, the maximum cases of domestic violence was coming from girls who were underage and married. So our community workers, our frontline trainers would keep saying that let's add curriculum, let's add messages, let's look at services for girls who were under 18, who couldn't negotiate condoms, who were facing multiple and early pregnancies, other forms of violence, mental, physical, etc. So we really got a push to start exploring the issue of early marriage from our work on DV. Then we did verified that among our community where we work in about 14 districts, and then we did a analysis of the national state data from the health surveys. That's how we began our work on early marriage. Honestly, when we started our work on domestic violence, very little money used to be given for research. This is 5-6 years ago, and some donors would say put 7% of your total budget for evaluation. Now that doesn't amount to very much, because also money that comes to women's organizations is not that large. So as a result of which we would do small but intensive qualitative research. We have worked with ICRW. Sitting here, Ravi's here. He knows that journey on Bell Baja, one of our campaigns. Good data. But I think we could have, had more sample, done more, in situ studies, etc., qualitative studies. But that's the limitation we face. Which with early marriage, I think we really were able to convince and work with 3IE, with Catalyst Management System, to really build out a study base for that. And yes, we are doing result and impact evaluation. We have very strong direct and indirect indicators. We'd be very happy to share that in sense of with you if you're interested in the design and the indicators, because they were very tough to create. And we're talking of a 4-year time frame. Somebody here, I think it's not, I would just like to reflect a minute. It's not about the time taken for the study, it's the time for the intervention to show results. Because in cases of work that we do on issues of violence against women, in this case early marriage, domestic violence, we do need time to do the intervention. I think the balance here is not the time taken for the study, which is as much you can collect baseline data, if done well, in anywhere between 3 months, depending on the scale of data collection and survey. But the implementation takes time to show the kinds of results that you want. So I think that's the other challenge that we are facing. And therefore, even to make recommendations on issues that are such deep-rooted problems, we don't have quick fixes. There's no way we can do that. And I think the last question on, small trials and implementation, I think somewhat to answer your question, they are extremely useful. I think we should be doing the trials, but I think we have to spend time on the implementation as well. And as an agency that does implementation, and we are an implementation organization, Breakthrough. So I think there is a lot of value in doing the trial, but change is not so easy to see. So we need to spend time, and then we hope that we can give process results. So in 4 years, we may be able to build out best practices, which we are willing to share. We may not have to wait for 4 years for lessons learned, but I think if we really want to see the impact of work, we need to sustain the projects and programs. So that's all I can say.
Great, thank you. And Ron, I think you have that same last question, and then a question about more information on the Bohrer experiment, as well as why you chose to do an evaluation.
So thanks, Joe, for the question, because I was talking about all the challenges. It's definitely a good to talk about why we did it. Because the question they asked was, we have an existing nutrition delivery system, which we think is not working. We want you to find out. And then we have 2 ideas to improve this, but we're not sure if that will work, and we want to evaluate it. So what did they ask us? They actually asked us, we want to know the impact of these 2 things. But before we scale it up across the state, we want to learn. So to that end, an impact evaluation seemed like the perfect sort of operational response to execute, operational answer to a way to answer their question, basically. And but sometimes, and this is important to note, we get a lot of times we get questions that don't lead to that. So for example, we got a question on a particular program in rural development, which has already been rolled out for a year and a half. It's an audit of auditors type of program. And we saw that, and they basically said, can you just tell us if it's working well? So, and that's not an impact assessment. So we told them, we cannot tell you if it's going to, what is the impact of the audit program on National Rural Employment Guarantee, but we can just tell you about the processes. Like, and so that's a very different thing. But this was very clearly an impact evaluation. And that's what we focus on, of course, as an organization. On doing small trials, on doing evaluations, I think it's of extreme value if done in a way that a lot of the challenges that I was pointing out can be addressed. And for example, if you're going to, it's not clear when you're going to try something out. There's a lot of, until it's tried and tested, and as Chris was saying earlier, until it's tried and tested, it's not clear whether it's going to work. And there are lots of reasons for why it should and lots of reasons for why it shouldn't. And there are a lot of examples of this. I mean, I really like a JPAL study on using technology to monitor ASHA workers, health workers in Rajasthan. And it completely backfired, and it actually led to a deterioration of the status quo. So if ASHA worker attendance was, if I can't remember this, was roughly 50%, after the program was implemented in the treatment areas, it actually dipped from what was an initial improvement to below 50% to I think about 40%. And so what was that? So it was very clear that you're trying something, you have a technological response, whereas it seemed that there was a very good political response by the ASHA workers that countered it, which you could not have figured out until you've actually tried it on the ground. So I think there's a lot of value in doing evaluations. What we now need to do is ensure that the evaluations can be useful for decision makers. And I think that's the challenge. If I need to make a policy decision today, will I depend on an impact evaluation organization, academic, researcher, to help me make that decision? The answer right now for most administrators is no. And if we here or some of us here in the audience think it's valuable, and most administrators don't think it is, so we need to figure out how we can come together. And that's really sort of one of the reasons we are sitting here today, and that's really, I think, where we need to move forward. A little bit more, you described our interventions in Bihar exactly correctly. Some of the other work that is, one is work in the pipeline is working with Panchayati Raj institutions on some of their interventions to improve governance in Bihar, decentralized governance in Bihar. Another one is working with a soft skills organization that's working with the school system to improve entrepreneurship skills and soft skills amongst 9th and 10th graders. Another one is on, and this is the one about rural employment, and that's actually not an impact evaluation, that was a process evaluation that we just completed on the quality of a particular audit program that the Rural Development Department was doing. The idea of our organization is to look at relevant policy questions that we can help answer using rigorous research.
Great, well, thank you. I really appreciate that not only were we getting to learn more about experiences while implementing impact evaluations, but all three of you also touched on the policy implications and how to reach out to decision makers with the findings, or how you're engaging them to take up the findings. So I think we all learned a lot. So thank you very much. And if I understand correctly, it is coffee break time outside.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.